Hello and welcome to my July 2019 reading wrap-up. This video is going to be a little bit different from my previous videos because it's still going to be a draw with me, but now it's going to be a reading wrap-up. So I'm trying to merge my two favorite parts of YouTube, BookTube, and Art Illustrated doesn't have a cool name for it, YouTube. So if you're new to my channel, I usually do draw with me's and paint with me's, but today I want to try something a little bit different and do a reading wrap up where I actually draw all of the books I read. So the materials I'm using for this paint with me are the Winsor & Newton designer gouache. This was given to me as a gift by my lovely friend who I painted in my previous draw with me, so check that out. She got this at a clearance sale of an art store that was closing, and even though I know it was on sale, I still know it is a great product and I've been so terrified to use it. I think since she gifted this to me over a year, maybe 2 years ago, this is only the second time I'm using it. So you can see I still kind of struggle a little with it. And because I'm so dumb, I got the white pan dirty and now I can't get a clear white. So a peachy white is the best I can do. In the month of July, I tried to participate in 4 different readathons. So those were the Book Junkie Trials, the Owls Catch-Up Readathon, because I want to do the Newts in August, the 24 in 48 readathon, which I did okay in actually. I got 12 out of the 48 hours, which was my goal. And the Reading Rush, previously known as the Booktubeathon. In addition to these 6 books, I also listened to 11 audiobooks, which I know sounds like a lot, but I always listen to audiobooks at the gym, and I happen to go to the gym a lot this month. So let's get started with the first book I read. This was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is an epic fantasy series, the first book in the Stormlight Archives, and I read most of it back in June and just finished it at the beginning of July. It is real good. I think it is one of the most across the board, all good reviews fantasy books. This book follows 3 POVs, and the first is a man named Kaladin who essentially starts out the book as a slave. And throughout the book, you get flashbacks and see how he came into that position. In this epic fantasy world, there are essentially the humans versus a race of pseudo-orcs, I guess. And they're at war over a giant field called the Shattered Plains. And it's called the Shattered Plains because it is essentially a giant desert full of these huge chasms, these huge canyons. And to get over these chasms, the human army needs bridges to put over the canyon. And Kaladin starts out as one of the bridgemen, which means the men who carry these bridges and are essentially sent to die out on the battlefield with no weapons and no armor. The other 2 perspectives are Shallan and Dalinar. Shallan is a young girl from a noble family, and Dalinar is a high prince, so he's basically one of the top tier generals in the human army, and he's a very noble guy. Obviously, these 2 characters you don't really care about because the book mostly follows Kaladin, and the later books in the series will follow Shallan and Dalinar. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars because it was amazing. And even though it's a long book, it really reminded me of when I was a kid and I would get sucked into a book and then 2 hours later I would look up and be like, where am I? What's going on? Because the world is so beautiful, the adventures are so cool. Just a warning, if you want to read this book, the first 50 pages make no sense. It's okay, it gets so much better. One of the reasons Brandon Sanderson is so popular is because his writing is so accessible. So please pick up this book. Don't be intimidated at all. Just sludge through those first 50 pages and it's smooth sailing from there. And actually, right after I finished this book, I started reading the second book, The Words of Radiance. And this one more follows Shallan, and in my opinion, I like it so much better. Because while the first book really focuses on the individual storylines of these 3 characters, in the second book, you get to see much more of the entire world and much more of the bigger picture of this world. I really wanted to finish Words of Radiance this month because I was using it for a challenge in both the Book Junkie Trials and the Owls. So in the Book Junkie Trials, this was my Drowning Deep, the world building book. And in Owls, this was my Potions, the sequel book. It was also my disadvantage in the Book Junkie trials, the book over 500 pages. But I did read 900 pages of this, which is like bigger than most books. So I'm gonna still count it. Look forward to next month's reading wrap up when I go more in depth with that book. Okay, now on to the second book I read this month. This was Gut Symmetries by Jeanette Winterson. This is essentially a literary fiction type of book. In the Book Junkie trials, I use this as the Dwarf Mount book, a book with a hint of romance. And in Owls, this was my Charms class, so the adult book. So this book essentially follows the affair of a young woman with her college professor. And throughout this, she and the professor's wife also fall in love. So I believe she's a physics student and this is a physics professor, so there's a lot about math and physics in this. And I actually read most of this on a day when I went strawberry picking and then to the beach. So I guess it is kind of a beach read. I definitely annotated this book a lot, highlighted a lot of very quotable quotes. And in general, I thought it was pretty good. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I love the element of bi-representation and kind of polyamorous relationship they had, and just everyone's reactions to everyone else. The book is mainly told from the POV of the two women, so the young woman and the wife, and it's just really interesting. You also get a little bit of their backstories and how they ended up becoming the people they were, and I just loved the tone. Off the top of my head, if I were to compare it to something that's more popular, I'd say like Milan Kundera's books, so The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's kind of in that tone, but lighter, if anything, and less political. So the third book I read this month was called Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I got this ebook from the library, and honestly, I only got it so I can fulfill the Owls Readathon prompt, the Defense Against the Dark Arts Owls, which is read a book that starts with R. And I kind of saw some really good reviews of this book, so I wanted to give it a shot. However, I only ended up giving it 3 stars. It was okay, but honestly, I found a lot of it really annoying, and I found myself rolling my eyes a lot, just at how these characters were acting. So this book is a YA book, and it follows a high school girl who is basically, she is the best. She does well in her classes, she's, I think, head girl or something, which I feel like a lot of readers, especially people on BookTube, really relate to. This was definitely how I felt I was in high school. Just overachiever, every studying perfect. But inside, she's a cute little nerd. And the fandom she nerds over is this podcast called Radio Silence, which is essentially kind of Night Vale-esque. And you know what? I love podcasts. I like Night Vale a lot. It was, I think, the first podcast I listened to, and now I'm obsessed with podcasts. And I really related to her when I was in high school. And this book is about how she develops a friendship with the show's creator, but they're awkward, and you kind of think this is going to be a romance, but it doesn't end up being a romance. And it's made very clear that they are totally platonic, which is something I'm definitely here for. And I just saw some really good reviews on BookTube about this, but I was unfortunately pretty disappointed. I think the problem is I'm just not into YA anymore. Not to bash YA, because it's great, and I used to love YA. Like, it would get my heart pounding, it would be total page-turny goodness. But unfortunately, I just don't feel that anymore. It's great if you still love YA. I don't know, maybe I've read too many. It lost the spark for me. I definitely think if I read this back in high school, I would have given it at least a 4-star. But maybe I'm kind of done reading books about awkward high schooler, overachiever nerd girls? Maybe that's it. The next book I read this month was The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. This was the first Faulkner book I read. Honestly, I didn't love it. I can tell objectively, it is a masterpiece, okay? It's great. And after I finished reading it, I went and watched some YouTube videos explaining it, and it seemed really cool, but I just wasn't into it. It's definitely a book that you have to finish it and then reread it from the beginning. So this book basically follows a family, and sections of the book go through perspectives of different members of the family, However, it's very unclear what's going on. A lot of the writing is very fragmented. When I was reading it, I could piece some things together, but it was too fragmented to really get a clear idea. I think it would be really cool to read it again, but I didn't love it enough to read it again. I think though it's like rich in essay writing material. Like I know objectively it is a great book. I'm just not that into it. I'm sorry, 3 out of 5 stars. Because honestly, I love reading literary books. I like reading classics. But I read to have fun and to have a good time and to escape from the stress of the world. So I don't really see the point in rereading a book I know I'm only going to like pretty well, not amazing, where there are so many amazing books out there to still read. Also, The Sound and the Fury counted as my Apothecary Towers in the Book Chunky trials. Read a random book. I used a random number generator, and this was the book that came randomly from my bookshelf. And for Owls, this was my History of Magic, a book that was written 10 or more years ago. So this book and the next book, you might notice that the covers are really similar, and that's because they are both published by the same publishing company, Arcturus Books. And you might recognize this very simplistic graphic style, which I love, because at all the chapters I've ever been to in the last 3 years, near the front of the store, there's a giant table of these books, and there's 3 for $10. Maybe at Barnes & Noble and Waterstones they have the same thing in different countries, but in Canada, just hit up the chapters and there's so many classics with really cool covers like this. The Sound and the Fury was definitely a cover buy for me because, like, look at that. How can you not buy it? Anyways, the next book was To Have and Have Not by Ernest Hemingway. For the Book Junkie trials, this was my The Great Library book, so a book that's been in your TBR forever. And I've wanted to read this since high school, so that's pretty forever. And for Owls, this was Herbology, a book with a plant on the cover. And you can see kind of in the background, the darker splotches are actually palm trees. So those are plants and it works. Yay. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I've read 2 other Ernest Hemingway books, The Sun Also Rises and Old Man and the Sea, and To Have and Have Not was definitely my favorite out of the 3 that I've read. It's a very short book, but I love the emotion of the characters. This book goes through many different perspectives, but it focuses on Harry Morgan, who is a fishing boat captain in kind of the Florida Key West area. And this is set during the Great Depression, and Harry Morgan is down on his luck, and he's forced to make some decisions to do some illegal activity, and he faces a lot of moral conundrums, both in what he chooses to do and how he chooses to react to certain fates that befall him. And throughout the book, there are many moments where you have to ask to have and have not, the titular question of the book. Does Morgan have this? Does he not have this? And how does he react? And what are the consequences? This was a great read, honestly, no complaints. Well, actually, one small complaint. The book is a little bit racist, which is weird. I don't read a lot of books that have explicit racism towards Chinese people. And I know it's a product of the time, but I don't know, it was a little bit off-putting. And there's certainly other instances of racism in this book as well. But other than that, it was really great. The only reason it wasn't a 5-star was I didn't love it. Even though I had so much fun reading it, I didn't feel this strong magnetic pull to it that I usually need for a good 5-star rating. And can we just talk about the cover for a moment? Like, gosh, that cover design, beautiful, beautiful. I loved it. And I had a really interesting time painting it. Okay, so the final book I read this month was The Souls of Yellow Folk by Wesley Yang, and it is a collection of essays. Also, I lost the footage for the drawing of this actual cover, so you'll have to bear with me, I'm sorry. This was the only book I read and finished during the reading rush. And I also listened to 2 audiobooks, but I didn't complete many of the challenges, unfortunately. I'll leave my reading rush profile down below, so add me as a friend on that, and I will see you for next year's reading rush. Back to the book, this was something I borrowed from my library. This also counted in the reading rush as the author's debut book, and a book with 5 words or more in the title. As the name might suggest, this is a book with essays about the Asian American experience. A lot of the essays in this book actually focus on one specific person per essay and really digs deep into their lives. And some of the later essays are about broader topics. While this book is kind of marketed as for yellow folk, only the first, I think 40% is actually about yellow folk. And rather than yellow folk, the general theme seems to be men who are considered by society to be losers. Many of these are intellectuals or men without the ability to connect socially. And the essays look at how society has failed these men, how they got to the point they got to. And a lot of the negative reviews about this book are about how Wesley Yang only talks about the male Asian perspective. But I think that's very fair because the way male Asians are viewed in the West is very different from how female Asians are viewed. And honestly, I feel like there's pretty little intersection in those two stereotypes. I'd also like to add that he only focuses on the Asian American perspective. So this is like the unique group of people that grew up in the West, mostly ABCs or ABKs, whatever you want to call them. These essays are not by, for, or about Asians, so people who grew up in Asian cultures. I think the perspective is totally different. But overall, I actually really liked a lot of these essays. There were only one or two that I kind of skimmed through. I actually flew through this book super quickly, and I read it as an ebook I borrowed on my phone, so that tells you a lot too about just how readable these essays were. And in the end, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. But those are the books I read in July. Overall, I did 8.5 owls, and this is definitely enough for my newts. I'm planning to pursue the Hogwarts Professor route. And because I'm gonna count Words of Radiance as my Drowning Deep book, the only book I didn't finish for the Book Junkie Trials was the Bookie Grail, which was the group read Stardust, I think, by Neil Gaiman. I was waiting for it on hold from my library, and I got it like 3 days after the month ended, so that's unfortunate. And if you want to check out the 11 audiobooks I listened to last month, I will link in the description my forum post to this Goodreads group called Hooked on Books. And this group basically does a lot of readathons where you can track your reading, and lately they've been doing monthly readathons. So July I participated for the first time, and I actually tracked my reading every single day of the month, and it was really fun. I'm gonna do it again for August, except I'm gonna track it weekly, not daily, which will be a lot less pressure. Anyways, that was my July reading wrap up. Let me know if you like this type of video where I try to combine booktube and a draw with me. And let me know if you have any suggestions about how I should do these videos in the future, because I definitely want to do reading wrap-ups every month. And this is just a really nice thing to have in my sketchbook. It's also really fun, honestly, to just draw covers for a while. But that is it for today's video. Click subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.